Thank you very much for that introduction. I hope in my comments I will make it pretty plain that I have one basic thing, which is I disagree with the title of the session. And in particular, there's one word that I disagree with, which is the or. And actually, I suspect, although it's true there are camps that basically say the scale of the challenge is clearly human beings have to change their behaviour in society, and others say there's amazing amounts we can do with technology, I'm not sure I know many people who've seriously studied technological history who think that it comes without any impact or involvement of societal change, and vice versa. But to get a bit more micro into this, what's the metric, the nature of society, of behaviour v technology, I'd actually thought I would just put up for a second the fact that, well, to even think about that question, you've got to think about how people take decisions. What determines how they behave? There are various sort of theories of behaviour. One that's quite useful in this context is that I've seen referred to Triandus, though I don't actually I can't claim I've read the source literature, and I've sort of adapted that to this diagram here. But basically what I was saying is actually behaviour is an output, and it's an output of what people intend to do, what they actually do through habit, and the facilitating conditions which make it possible or attractive or sustainable to do one thing rather than the other, which is in the middle largely a function of technology. And there I've just flagged the three main end-use sectors and where some of this may influence on those sort of options. But the classic example is you can get people who are really environmentally committed and really would like to not use their car so much, but actually they live in a place where it's completely impossible if they want to maintain any decent social life or work life. So what's the point of arguing about social versus technological, and which is it? If you can't facilitate an idea to be more environmentally sustainable, you're not going to get very far. I think the thing that has really struck me, though, and that I've actually focused on far more in recent work, is actually what are the different levels of those change processes, whether it's behaviour or technological. And that's what I really wanted to focus on. And Carl referred to sort of three levels, which the more I've worked on this, and this is work that's actually culminated over 2 or 3 years towards a book hopefully coming out soon. It's about as late as the Global Energy Assessment, I think. The more one looks at it, there are 3 quite distinct domains of human decision frameworks, theories around those, the kind of mitigation options you have available, the sorts of technological opportunities associated with that, and what that would imply for policy. Frankly, if you look at fairly short-term stuff and normal behaviour modes, energy is not a big deal. It really isn't, believe me. How many ordinary people get up and think, now, how much will it cost me if I turn the kettle on? Will I optimise my decision-making today, my travel pattern? It's rubbish. 99% of human behaviour is habit. It's what we've done. It's what we're used to. It's what we take for granted. And you can say the same attitudes to global environmental problems. 99.9% of people probably think, frankly, they don't think about it very much and can't do much anyway. They're either diffident, not caring, or totally disempowered to do anything anyway. It's not their problem. So the fields of theory you're dealing with are to do with behavioural, organisational theories, etc. I could go on, and you'll get the sense, because I'll touch on that later. On slightly longer time scales and bigger decisions, you may have things where costs and impacts are tangible and significant, and people think about them and they try and optimise their choice. They make conscious, calculated choices. If you are conscious and you calculate, you kind of try and optimise, which is what economists assume people do all the time. They don't, but they do sometimes. And that means you are generally in the realm, if you are in that second domain of optimization calculation, you're thinking about trade-offs. You're thinking about economic trade-offs and other trade-offs and behavior. So you're trying to make the best trade-offs you can, and in this context, that by and large means you're doing some sort of substitution of cleaner production and product choices. And markets and prices, by the way, I think have proven themselves to be the most influential thing in that second realm. Third area, however, long-term transformational change is neither of the above. I mean, what we emit and do in transport in 2050 has very little to do with the existing behavioural patterns and very little to do with markets and prices. It's going to be very strongly driven by infrastructure investments, which are, and the associated co-evolution of systems and technologies of roads, distribution networks, vehicles, and supply fuel chains. They are evolutionary processes, they are institutional processes. You're trying to effectively evolve the option set that you have through innovation of both technological and social behaviour. Price doesn't have a lot to do with it. Personal decision-making doesn't have a lot to do with it. You're talking about public-led investment or strategic investment. So bear in mind those three pillars. Just to give a bit more flavour, I'm not saying that covers the entire intellectual ground we need to think about, but this chart simply tries to summarise those lines of reasoning by saying you've got kind of processes that work over a few years that are broadly to do with behavioural and organisational structure as they exist today and determine what people or organisations do. Those are the decision-making units. As you move down this diagram, over time, you increase the time horizons, you increase the spatial scale and the scale of the decision maker. You're talking about bigger things, bigger organisations, company investment decisions, governmental decision making, and so forth, by and large within a pre-established jurisdiction which define the rules of investment, etc., within a country. So I should have said, as you'll see, I flanked this because risk and uncertainty is not a discrete thing assigned to one of those domains. It is relevant in all of them, but it takes different forms. You look at the literature of behavioural attitudes to risk, and it's very different from the literature on corporate investment under risk-taking. And you look at the risk issue on a longer timescale and a bigger institutional, and you're in the domain of security management, security systems, national security. Again, they're not optimizing machines. They say, how safe do we need to be? What's the political discourse around safe enough? On the right-hand side, again flanking, there is an issue about ethics and collective action, which again feed in differently, whether you're talking about individual units, the social unit of the local town hall and mayor, or national level collective action, democracy to reach common decisions, or international system coordination between states and at the global level. So the idea that we were ever going to get one theory to span all this lot strikes me as, frankly, extraordinarily arrogant. And to have warfare between, is it all behavioural and organisational economics, or is it neoclassical economics that's right, or is it evolutionary economics that's right, is ridiculous. They are appropriate domains to certain parts of the problem, timescales and decision units. And then this is the lot. Don't worry, it doesn't spin beyond this. But I wanted to then bring this to the policy dimensions. So what you have on as we move towards the applied so what questions is on the left-hand side, I've just sketched in slightly more direct language what are the opportunities that arise from this. They are basically on the first domain, you make smarter choices, crudely, around individual or organisational decision structures. You're substituting cleaner products and processes, or you're changing the innovation and infrastructure investment. What are your levers to do those things? Well, standards and engagement tend to be the dominant policy tools in the first domain. Frequently, actually, we deal with it just by setting a standard, energy efficiency standard, other standard. You say, if there's rubbish out there in the market, safety standards, people cannot be expected to optimize their level of safety and get all the information. You just set a standard. And if you're not going to set a standard, you need to find a way of engaging the decision makers to actually start thinking about what they're doing, buying, behaving. That will have knock-on effects on the other domains, but that's the primary point of access, hence the big green blob. If you're after cleaner products and processes, on a sort of substitution sense, frankly, Still, most decisions on that are taken on economic grounds, in which case you better get relative prices right, and you better think about the market structures and the prices. One thing that has slightly surprised me in the systems transformation field is how little economics there is in it. Well, frankly, most of the world still operates around economic principles, and if you can't engage with that discourse and instruments, that's going to really limit the sort of policy impact of the systems transformation world. But again, represented by the big green dot in the middle, because it's frankly by far the most effective for those kinds of choices in the middle. It will have some knock-on effects on behaviour. Higher prices will kick people into suddenly thinking, oh, maybe I'd better think about my energy consumption. It may stimulate people to do more innovation investment or R&D. But it's not the primary driver. On the right-hand column, the third pillar of policy, you're talking about public-led or other strategic investment, which is probably modest immediate impact on smarter choices, some relevance in choice of cleaner products and processes, but where it really hits big is on innovation and infrastructure. That's where it dominates those decision-making processes. And on the right hand, as a reminder, I've just sketched the relevant fields of theory that align with each of those. Now, so that's just to give a flavour of what I'd say are the three domains of the things that we're dealing with. From a integrated policy challenge perspective, the real key is to say, okay, let's stop this ridiculous debate about is it all behaviour and standards or should it really be just pricing. It's say, you're going to need all three of these pillars because you need to change all three things. Therefore, how do you do them simultaneously? How do they integrate? How do they reinforce each other? Easy examples. There's tremendously interesting empirical research to say that the society's tolerance of energy prices has a very clear threshold. We have never had societies that spend more than about 10% of their wealth on energy. We're starting to hit those levels. Anybody who thinks you're going to double energy prices for carbon is in cloud cuckoo land unless you also get societies more efficient so that bills go down. And over time, you will also need innovation to facilitate that. By the way, carbon markets might generate revenues that help to fund the innovation programs and generate more choices to make the carbon pricing more acceptable. That's just one example. Unless you get all three pillars aligned and integrated in a societally acceptable manner, you will fail to change either technology or society, and you need to change both.